All right, what's up, guys? Hey, back for another talk about another Hall of Fame discussion, but this is one that doesn't really happen that much. His name is Cap Anson, and this is one of these that goes back to the 19th century. I think I mentioned before that I'm probably not very well qualified to talk about the statistics of the 19th century. WAR, of course, loves Cap Anson, 94.3. Most people won't talk about why this guy shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. Instead, they'll talk about how great he was. Never hit above 400, except, oh, no, I was wrong, in 1872, if you consider this league the National Association to actually be a major league. Professional league, yeah. Major league in the sense of the National League, I don't think so. Didn't hit above 400 after that at all, though he came very, very close for Chicago in 1881. Had a long career from age 19 up to age 45. I'm guessing he probably played it before in 1871. He couldn't, though, in the so-called major leagues because there was nothing like that around. You've got to take a lot of these stats, though, really with a grain of salt. I mean, 1872, 200 OPS plus. Yeah, but what was the National Association in 1872? I mean, come on. The game was a lot different back then. If I understand right, you could probably look at these teams and see, yeah, you have two pitchers here on the Boston Red Sox. I was going to say you can look at their pitcher stats and it'll tell you the stats of one of the pitchers, or instead of both. And Harry Wright only appeared in 7 games, throwing a grand total of 25 innings. Al Spalding was their key pitcher. Anyway, I could go on about this for days on end. You don't see anybody going 38-8 today. But you might be wondering why in the world would I make a video about how Cap Anson shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame? Well, the thumbnail for this one kind of gives it away. Interesting because I actually didn't know very much about this. I haven't spent a whole lot of time studying about him. So we'll go ahead and take a look. I haven't even opened this up yet, so who knows what's going to come up. What I did look at here was his wonderful Wikipedia page. I love these old Judge baseball cards, by the way, so we're going to save that. Love looking at those old Judge cards. Anything that's 19th century looks really, really nice, though I do not approve of tobacco smoking. But you can see here, racial intolerance is the problem. So Anson was a very major reason why the color line existed. Thank you very much, Cap Anson. Now, Bill James feels that Anson's influence was not huge, and it's enormously likely that Jim Crow would have come to baseball even had Cap Anson never been born. I think that James is probably right, in terms of sort of counterfactualism, but I mean, the truth is that it is Anson who refused to play against Toledo because of Moses Fleetwood Walker. And that's kind of what happened, and then he made his racial remarks and did all of this other stuff. Not really a good guy. Right? Why are we honoring this person? But it goes beyond that, and this is the part that was surprising to me. He was authoritarian as a manager, marching his players onto the field in military formation. I just realized this is probably too small for you to be able to see any of it, so we will increase it. This is just the Wikipedia page. Banning alcohol consumption among players during the season. They must have loved him. And he also bet on baseball, mainly on his team's chances to win the pennant, mainly, of course. Today, that would be considered incongruous with moral character. Who wrote this? Right. However, in the era, the main concern was players taking bribe to purposely lose games, I suppose. Yeah. I mean, this is where the argument comes up, right? Where we talk about Pete Rose. We talk about guys who we knew gambled a lot, like John McGraw. We talk about, what was it, Willie Mays getting thrown out of the game for a very short amount of time for appearing somewhere in Las Vegas and stuff like that, And we talk about Major League Baseball and its current dealings with gamblers. Why in the world is the racist Cap Anson in the Hall of Fame, but Pete Rose not? Right? Why in the world does this guy get in, but Barry Bonds doesn't? Or, one of these other, Roger Clemens doesn't, because of the steroid tint. I mean, where is the fairness and equity with this? And why don't we have some sort of movement to take him out? Right? I mean, this is interesting, too. On corruption in sports, he says the following in 1891, the time may have been and probably was in baseball was as rotten as horse racing, but that time has gone by. The men in control of baseball matters are of the highest personal character, and no one will say anything against them. Are you kidding me? Have you watched any of my videos or read any of my articles about what happened, maybe not in 1891, but definitely by the end of the 19th century with the owners in the National League and with a lot of the controversy that was going on? These guys were crooks. These guys were absolute crooks, and they were ready to do anything they could to get a buck from you. This guy was pretty corrupt, I'll tell you that much. We'll take a look here really quick and see if there's anything that stands out here in his Sabre biography. And I think we've already missed the point of his racism. He had been a teetotaler since his youngest days, but his whites were a hard-drinking crew. They kept the captain up nice with his behavior. Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff in here, isn't there? Some reporters called Anson the man who saved the National League, but many former leaguers hated the Chicago captain for his attitude towards them, which is interesting. And anyway, this guy is not a good guy. And just taking a quick look here to see if we get any of the other good stuff. It's interesting because most of the stuff that is really interesting about him was actually in the Wikipedia article and not in this personal biography. I hate to say this, but this particular biography looks like it has been very severely censored and stripped of anything that would make him look bad, except, of course, for this. Regrettably, Anson used his stature to drive minorities from the game, and then the story is told. But yeah, this is not quite, I think, as true to the character of this man as the Wikipedia page is. And then there's the argument about his career hits total. Anyway, that's a long way of talking about a different or a related subject that's somewhat different, which is the subject of what is this about the morality of players and their ability to get into the Hall of Fame. And the problem that we have is that when we say that certain players who we don't like for whatever reason, whether it is actually due to some sort of racist thing or if it's because of the tint of steroid use, right? Because they took the wrong drugs, or because, it's like the guy, gambled and had a big problem with it or something like that. I mean, for whatever reason we don't like these players, we're saying, oh yeah, we want to keep these guys out of the Hall. Let's not put them in at all. Why in the world do we have this guy in? Who is going to defend Cap Anson and what he did and what he said? I mean, you could even say, and this comes up a lot when you talk about like really poor behavior from people, that was racist in nature. You could say, well, he was a product of his times. That might be the case. But in the case of Anson, I'm not reading about any other players, from that era, getting big news and big historical articles about them for doing the same thing, right? It just so happens to be the fact that Anson did it. Right? I mean, we know that when Jackie Robinson came into the major leagues, that there were certain players who treated him poorly, and their reputations have been rightfully tarnished because of what they did, and we know their names, right? I mean, the fact that there's some sort of like, social thing that's set up, and this is what the culture is like, and so on and so forth, I don't think gives anybody sort of like free reign and the ability to say, oh, well, this guy acted like a total jerk to somebody because of the color of their skin and for no other reason, but it's okay because other people thought that way or might have done the same thing or something like that. I mean, come on. This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. You shouldn't give people a pass for acting in a way that is awful and that is horrible just because like somebody else was doing it or because, oh, well, that's what the cultural milieu was like or whatever. It's ridiculous. In the case of Anson, though, the big question is, look, this guy was, I mean, it says right there, he's known to have had a lot of issues with gambling on, like, the pennant that his team was involved in. Sure, he didn't bet against his team, but wasn't that the argument about Pete Rose back in 1989, right? Did he bet against his team or not? I mean, that's kind of what the problem is, right? Anyway, I mean, we can go back and forth about this, but, there's a huge amount of hypocrisy here where, one player who was a great player is not honored at all because of having this problem. But I'll tell you what, I never heard any stories of Pete refusing to play with somebody because it was black, right? I mean, how come that doesn't, take into account? Then again, we also have to deal with stuff like, Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis or J.G. Taylor Spink, both of whom were also notably racist and who had a lot of major influence on the game of baseball and the way it developed. In fact, and I haven't sat down to write this quite yet, but one of these days we will get to writing about the sporting news again, and I'm going to tell you all about how I actually think that J.G. Taylor Spink is one of the greatest personalities and characters in baseball history because of what he did for the preservation of baseball history, things that kept baseball history in the limelight. What I'll say to this is that there's a reason why you don't hear much about college football history, which has just as rich a history as Major League Baseball. And the reason why is because you didn't have a good college football newspaper in the 20s, 30s, and 40s that was run by J.G. Taylor Spink. I mean, this guy had a really major and very meaningful influence over over the course of baseball history and the historiography of baseball history. So we'll talk about that again one day. But as far as the man's character is concerned, he was an absolute jerk. He was a complete racist. There's no question about it, right? And I mean, there's no defending him. You go back, you look at the thing, you look at what he said, you look at what he printed, and you can tell this guy was a racist. I would argue that Cap Anson's the same way. And at some point in time, we've got to come to terms with some of these guys and ask ourselves, like, you know, I mean, are we really going to give these guys a lot of credit, even for the good things that they did, when you take into the context of these awful things that they did at the same time, right? We really do have to have that sort of thought. Anyway, there you have it. I've had my spiel. I'll talk with you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.